A McDonnell Douglas MD-83, a familiar sight in the skies, ascends smoothly into the air, its engines humming with routine precision. But what started as an ordinary flight is about to spiral into a terrifying ordeal. Moments ago, the cockpit was a place of calm, but now an unexpected malfunction has thrown everything into chaos. The aircraft begins to struggle, losing its battle against gravity, and the pilots are faced with an impossible choice. With the ground rushing up to meet them, the once stable machine now teeters on the brink of disaster. In a matter of seconds, a routine journey has become a fight for survival. What unseen force is pulling this aircraft from the sky? Will the 153 souls on board Dana Air Flight 0992 survive the unimaginable? Or is this the final chapter in their story? Let's find out. Before we dive into the harrowing story of Dana Air Flight 0992, make sure to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you never miss an update on the most gripping stories in aviation history. June 3rd, 2012 began as a day like any other. The skies over Abuja were clear, the air warm with familiar humidity of the rainy season. People across Nigeria were going about their daily routines, oblivious to the tragedy that would soon unfold. A tragedy that would reverberate throughout the nation and beyond. At Abuja's Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport, the hustle and bustle of air travel continued as usual. Among the many flights scheduled that day was Dana Air Flight 0992, a routine domestic journey to Lagos. The flight was a familiar one for Nigerians, a short hop between the country's political capital and its bustling commercial hub. The passengers began to board the McDonnell Douglas MD-83 aircraft, a workforce of the skies that had been flying for over 2 decades. As they found their seats, they were greeted by the flight attendants, a team of 6 professionals who were well trained and experienced. These flight attendants were a diverse group, each with their own story, united by a commitment to ensuring the safety and comfort of the passengers. They had performed this routine many times, always with the calm demeanor that comes with experience. Leading the crew in the cockpit were 2 seasoned pilots, men whose lives have been dedicated to the skies. Captain Peter Waxton, an experienced aviator with over 18,000 flight histories to his name. At 55 years old, he had spent decades in the cockpit, flying various aircraft types and accumulating a wealth of knowledge and experience. A native of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Captain Waxton was known for his professionalism and composure. Before joining Dana Air, he had flown for several airlines, including Spirit Airlines in the United States, where he had served as a captain on the very same MD-83 model. His colleagues described him as meticulous, disciplined, and a mentor to many younger pilots. Captain Waxton's extensive experience was a source of confidence for the passengers and crew, a reassurance that they were in capable hands. First Officer Mahmoud Sabo, 34 years old, was the co-pilot on Flight 0992. A Nigerian national, First Officer Sambo had built a solid career as a pilot, earning a reputation for his sharp skills and dedication to his craft. Though younger and less experienced than Captain Waxton, he was a competent pilot with several thousand flight hours under his belt. He had been trained both in Nigeria and abroad, where he honed his skills in handling various aircraft. Sambo was proud to be part of Nigeria's growing aviation industry, and he took his responsibilities seriously, always striving to improve and learn from his more experienced colleagues. For him, flying was not just a job, it was a calling. Together, Waxton and Sambo formed a strong team, complementing each other's strengths and experiences. They had flown together before and developed a mutual respect that is essential for the teamwork required in the cockpit. Both were committed to ensuring that every flight was conducted safely, following the rigorous procedures that are the backbone of aviation. The cabin crew too was well prepared. These 6 flight attendants were more than just the smiling faces that greeted passengers. They were trained professionals, ready to act in any emergency. They had undergone extensive safety training, learning how to handle everything from turbulence to medical emergencies. They knew the MD-83 inside and out, and they were vigilant, always keeping an eye out for anything that might affect the safety of the flight. As the plane prepared for takeoff, the passengers settled into their seats, confident in the abilities of the crew. For them, this was just another flight, another routine journey. Some were frequent flyers, accustomed to the rituals of air travel, while others were less experienced but reassured by the calm professionalism of the crew. Among the passengers were business travelers, families, tourists, and individuals on personal journeys. Each had their own reason for being on Flight 0992, their own story that led them to board the plane that day. As the aircraft taxied to the runway, they were unaware that their fate was now intertwined with the skill and decision-making of the men and women at the controls. If you've enjoyed the story so far, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you'll be the first to learn about some of aviation's darker histories. At precisely 2:58 p.m., Flight 0992 took off from Abuja's runway. The MD-83 lifted smoothly into the air, climbing steadily as it left the city behind. For the 153 souls on board, it was the beginning of what they believed would be a routine hour-long flight to Lagos. The pilots in the cockpit, Captain Wuxton and First Officer Sambo, were focused, their years of experience guiding them through every phase of the flight. As the plane ascended to its cruising altitude, the passengers relaxed. Some dozed off, others pulled out books or magazines, while a few chatted quietly with their seatmates. The flight attendants, seasoned professionals, moved efficiently through the cabin, attending to every passenger's needs. The aircraft leveled off at 26,000 feet, cruising serenely above the Nigerian landscape. Below, the patchwork of green fields, forests, and towns stretched out endlessly, the world below small and distant. From within the pressurized cabin, the passengers were comfortably insulated from the realities of the earthbound world. What no one on board could know was that this routine flight, guided by such capable hands, was about to turn into a catastrophe that would forever change the lives of everyone connected to it. It was at this altitude, just over halfway through the flight, that the first sign of trouble appeared. At approximately 3:44 p.m., the left engine of the MD-83 failed. Engine failures, though serious, are not uncommon in aviation. Modern aircraft are designed to fly safely on just one engine, and pilots are extensively trained to handle such emergencies. Captain Wuxton and First Officer Sambo quickly assessed the situation. Remaining calm, they shut down the failed engine and initiated standard procedures to divert to Lagos, the nearest airport with the necessary facilities to handle the emergency. Despite the engine failure, there was no immediate sense of panic. The crew were confident in their ability to manage the situation. The passengers, unaware of the unfolding drama in the cockpit, continued their activities, oblivious to the mechanical failure that had already set the stage for catastrophe. But just 3 minutes later, at 3:47 p.m., the situation took a devastating turn. The right engine also began to lose power. Suddenly, the MD-83, a machine designed to soar through the skies with the grace and power of two roaring engines, was rendered nearly powerless. The cockpit, once a place of quiet professionalism, became a scene of urgent crisis management. The pilots attempted to restart the engines, but the efforts were in vain. With both engines failing, the aircraft was losing altitude rapidly. The plane was now in a grave situation, a descent from which recovery would be extremely difficult, if not impossible. As the pilots wrestled with the controls, the plane descended towards the earth. The calm demeanor that had marked the early part of the flight was replaced by a growing sense of dread. Inside the cabin, passengers began to notice the unusual vibrations and the unsettling sounds of a plane in distress. Fear crept into the hearts of those who sensed that something was terribly wrong. By 3:53 p.m., just 6 minutes after the second engine failure, the pilots declared a full-scale emergency. The MD-83 was now dangerously close to the ground, descending at a rate that made it clear that a safe landing at Lagos Airport was unlikely. The pilots, skilled and experienced, were now fighting for the survival of everyone on board. With the aircraft rapidly losing altitude, Captain Wuxton made a desperate attempt to steer the plane towards Lagos. The city's skyline was just visible in the distance, a tantalizing glimpse of safety that was slipping further and further away with each passing second. The ground was approaching fast, too fast. In the cabin, passengers were now fully aware that something was terribly amiss. The once peaceful environment was now filled with anxious whispers, cries of alarm, and prayers. Mothers clutched their children, travelers held hands, and some, resigned to their fate, closed their eyes and braced for the worst. At 3:56 p.m., Dana Air Flight 0992 crashed into the densely populated Ijuishaga neighborhood, just a few miles from Lagos's Murtala Muhammad International Airport. The impact was catastrophic. The plane plowed through residential buildings, creating a scene of unimaginable destruction. Houses were obliterated, and the once bustling neighborhood was transformed into a chaotic and burning inferno. The crash site was a scene of horror. The MD-83 disintegrated on impact, its fuselage torn apart as it collided with the ground. A massive fireball erupted from the wreckage, fueled by the remaining jet fuel, consuming everything in its path. The black smoke billowed into the sky, visible from miles away. On board, all 153 people perished instantly. The force of the crash was too great for anyone to survive. The passengers and crew, who just moments before had been full of life, were now gone, their lives snuffed out in an instant. The tragedy did not end there. 6 people on the ground, going about their daily lives in their homes and businesses, were also killed in the fiery aftermath. The devastation was total. Families were torn apart, entire communities were plunged into mourning, and a nation was left in shock. The loss was incomprehensible, the grief unbearable. News of the crash spread quickly across Nigeria and the world. Within hours, the scale of the disaster became clear. Dana Air Flight 0992 had become one of the deadliest aviation accidents in Nigerian history, a tragedy that would leave a permanent scar on the nation's memory. Rescue workers, firefighters, and local volunteers rushed to the crash site, battling the intense flames in a desperate attempt to find survivors. But their efforts were in vain. The fire was too fierce, the wreckage too mangled. The crash had taken everything, leaving behind only the charred remnants of what once was. In the days that followed, the nation mourned. Vigils were held, memorials erected, and prayers offered for the victims. Families, friends, and loved ones of those who perished struggled to come to terms with their loss. The pain was overwhelming, the grief palpable. The crash of Dana Air Flight 0992 was not just a tragedy for those directly affected, it was a tragedy for an entire country. Amidst the mourning, questions began to arise. How could this happen? What went wrong? Could this disaster have been prevented? The search for answers began almost immediately. In the wake of the crash, Nigeria's Accident Investigation Bureau launched a full-scale investigation, aided by international aviation experts. The goal was to determine what had caused both engines to fail in such a catastrophic manner. The investigation was complex, requiring the careful analysis of the wreckage, the flight data records, often called black boxes, and the maintenance records of the aircraft. The MD-83 involved in the crash had a long history. It had been in service for over 22 years, operating with various airlines before being acquired by Dana Air in 2009. While the aircraft had undergone regular maintenance, there were concerns about the adequacy of those checks. The investigation would reveal that these concerns were not unfounded. As the investigation progressed, disturbing details began to emerge. It was discovered that the engines had failed due to fuel starvation, a condition where the engines are deprived of the fuel necessary to operate. But this wasn't due to a lack of fuel on board. The aircraft had enough fuel for the journey. Instead, the issue lay in the fuel system itself. The investigation revealed that there had been ongoing issues with the fuel system, including fuel leaks and blockages, which had not been properly addressed during maintenance. These unresolved issues led to the catastrophic failure of both engines. The aircraft's inability to restart the engines was attributed to a combination of factors, including improper maintenance procedures, inadequate oversight by regulatory authorities, and a failure to follow standard safety protocols. The final report, released months later, was a damning indictment of the state of the aviation safety in Nigeria. It highlighted significant lapses in maintenance, oversight, and regulatory enforcement. The report concluded that the crash was a preventable disaster, a tragic result of systemic failures within the aviation industry. The findings of the investigation sent shockwaves through Nigeria's aviation industry. The crash of Dana Air Flight 0992 was not just an isolated incident, it was a symptom of a much, much larger problem. The systemic failures that led to the disaster were a wake-up call, a stark reminder that the safety of passengers should never be compromised. In the aftermath of the investigation, there were calls for sweeping reforms. The Nigerian government vowed to overhaul the aviation industry, promising stricter regulations, better oversight, and more rigorous enforcement of safety standards. Dana Air was grounded indefinitely, and other airlines faced increased scrutiny as authorities sought to prevent another tragedy. For the families of the victims, the findings provided some answers but little comfort. The knowledge that their loved ones had died due to preventable errors only deepened their grief. The crash had taken so much from them: fathers, mothers, children, friends. No amount of reform could bring them back. The crash of Dana Air Flight 0992 became a symbol of the need for change. It was a turning point, a moment that forced Nigeria to confront the weaknesses in its aviation system. The lessons learned from the disaster would go on to influence policies and practices in the years that followed, as the country worked to improve the safety of its skies. Behind the statistics and the technical details of the investigation were the human stories, the lives lost in the crash of Dana Air Flight 0992. Each of the 153 passengers and crew members on board had a story, a life full of dreams, hopes, and loved ones. The 6 people who perished on the ground were also caught in the cruel randomness of fate. Among the passengers was Dr. Levi Ajuonuma, a renowned Nigerian media personality and the Group General Manager of Public Affairs for the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation. Known for his charismatic presence on television and his eloquent communication skills, Dr. Ajuonuma was a respected figure in Nigeria. His death was a significant loss, not just to his family, but to the entire nation. Another victim was Sunday Uti, a former Nigerian athlete who had won a bronze medal in the 4x400 meters relay at the 1984 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles. Uti was a national hero, a symbol of Nigerian pride on the global stage. His death in the crash was a heartbreaking loss for the sports community. These were just 2 of the many lives lost on that fateful day. The passengers represented a cross-section of Nigerian society: business leaders, professionals, students, families on vacation, and ordinary citizens going about their lives. Each person on the flight had a future that was tragically cut short. For the families left behind, the grief was overwhelming. The loss was not just of a person, but of dreams, the potential, and the future that each of these victims represented. Parents mourned children, children mourned parents, and communities mourned the loss of friends and neighbors. The 6 people who died on the ground were also mourned. They were in their homes, going about their daily lives when disaster struck. The randomness of their deaths added another layer of tragedy to an already devastating event. The crash of Dana Air Flight 0992 left a deep scar on Nigeria, one that would take years to heal. The aftermath of the disaster was a period of national mourning, reflection, and ultimately a drive for change. But for the families of the victims, the road to healing was a long and difficult one. In the months following the crash, Memorials were held across the country, vigils were organized, and communities came together to remember the lives lost. The outpouring of grief was a testament to the impact of the disaster on the national consciousness. For many families, the process of healing involved seeking justice. Lawsuits were filed against Dana Air, the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority, and other parties involved. The legal battles were complex and protracted, as families sought accountability for the preventable errors that led to the crash. Some families found solace in advocacy, pushing for reforms in the aviation industry to ensure that no other family would have to endure the pain they had experienced. Their efforts contributed to the push for better safety standards and a more rigorous oversight in Nigeria's aviation sector. Over time, the shock and raw grief began to give way to a more measured remembrance. The victims of Dana Air Flight 0992 were not forgotten. Their names were etched in memorials, their stories told and retold, and their legacies honored through ongoing efforts to improve aviation safety. But even as the nation moved forward, the pain of loss remained. For those who lost loved ones in the crash, life would never be the same. The memories of that fateful day, the unanswered questions, and the dreams that would never be realized were a permanent part of their lives. As the years passed, the memory of Dana Air Flight 0992 remained a poignant reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of safety. The victims were remembered not just as names on a list, but individuals whose lives had meaning and purpose. Memorials were erected in their honor, places where loved ones could come to reflect and remember. These memorials served as a reminder to all who visited of the cost of complacency and the need for vigilance. The crash of Dana Air Flight 0992 is a chapter in Nigeria's history that will never be forgotten. It's a story of loss, of grief, and of the enduring human spirit. It's a story that reminds us of the preciousness of life and the importance of doing everything in our power to protect it. May the victims of Dana Air Flight 0992 rest in peace, and may their legacy be one of lasting change and enduring safety.